The planet Novus Prime was a thriving human colony, a beacon of peace and progress on the edge of the galaxy. It was a world untouched by war, where settlers had built their homes among tranquil fields, bustling cities, and vibrant forests. Life was simple, yet prosperous. People lived in harmony, focused on their families and communities, unburdened by the heavy hand of galactic politics. But all that changed when the Zorath arrived. The first wave came without warning. A brutal assault, overwhelming in its intensity. Zorath warships, massive behemoths of steel and flame, descended from the heavens like harbingers of destruction. Their guns opened fire on the colony without a single provocation. Cities were reduced to smoldering ruins, people torn apart in the blink of an eye, and entire sectors of Novus Prime were turned into barren wastelands. The weapon they used was a weapon banned across the galaxy, the Quantum Disruptor. This device was capable of destabilizing molecular bonds, causing structures to collapse and life to disintegrate at an atomic level. It was a weapon of unspeakable horror, and its use was considered a war crime by every sentient species in the galaxy. But the Zorath had no regard for such laws. They wanted power, control, and dominance over every species they encountered. The humans had no chance to fight back. They weren't soldiers, they weren't warriors. They were civilians, farmers, scientists, and engineers. Ordinary people who had only come to this far-off world to build a better life. The Zorath slaughtered them without mercy. The Zorath thought it was over. They believed humanity would cower in fear, that the galaxy would turn a blind eye to their attack, as it had so many times before. But they underestimated one thing: humanity's capacity for vengeance. News of the massacre on Novus Prime spread like wildfire. At first, it was met with disbelief. No one could fathom such a brutal act. But as the first transmission videos reached the Central Worlds, showing the sheer scale of the destruction, anger began to grow. The humans had been pushed too far. They had always been the underdogs, the newcomers in the vast galaxy. But now, they were something else entirely. A people united by grief, fury, and a thirst for justice. The leaders of Earth and its colonies, once divided by politics and petty disputes, convened for an emergency session. Humanity had never faced a threat like this. They weren't prepared for war, but they had something that the Zorath did not: a fierce will to survive and protect their own. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about ensuring that this crime would never be allowed to happen again. General Sarah Collins, a decorated war hero who had seen combat during humanity's early space expansions, stood before the council. Her face was grim, but her voice was strong. "We will not stand by and let this pass. The Zorath have committed a crime against every human who ever lived. It's time to make them regret it." And with that, the decision was made. The humans would fight back. The Zorath may have been the galaxy's most feared invaders, but humanity was about to show them something they had never seen before: a people who, when pushed to the brink, could become an unstoppable force. Humanity was not unprepared for war, but they had never faced anything like the Zorath. Their weapons, their tactics, and their sheer cruelty were unlike anything the human forces had ever encountered. But while the Zorath were confident that their power would crush the humans swiftly, they were making a grave mistake. They underestimated humanity's ingenuity. General Sarah Collins, now appointed the leader of the human military campaign, quickly realized that brute force would not win this war. Humans didn't have the luxury of matching the Zorath in terms of sheer numbers or advanced firepower. What they did have was creativity, resourcefulness, and a relentless will to survive. The human governments, once fractured by territorial disputes and political gridlock, now united under the banner of one singular purpose: to defeat the Zorath and prevent them from committing further atrocities across the galaxy. The Global Defense Council was formed, an alliance of Earth's greatest military minds, scientists, engineers, and strategists, who would pool their resources to develop technologies capable of standing up to the Zorath. At first, Humanity's response was slow. Shipyards were overworked, armament factories ramped up production, and every able-bodied individual was pressed into service. But humanity's greatest asset was its ability to innovate on the fly, to quickly adapt and think outside the box when faced with overwhelming odds. This was something the Zoreth could never have predicted. In hidden research facilities across Earth, scientists worked tirelessly to adapt existing human technology. They reverse-engineered captured Zoreth weaponry and began to design energy shields that could block the Zoreth's devastating quantum disruptors. In military labs, engineers reworked Earth's most advanced fighter ships, modifying them to be faster and stealthier, better suited for the hit-and-run tactics humanity would need to survive. But it wasn't just about new technology. Tactics would win the war. Humanity's military planners began to study the Zoreth, analyzing their patterns of attack and weaknesses. What the humans quickly realized was that the Zoreth, though powerful, were predictable. They relied on brute strength and overwhelming force, rarely changing tactics or adjusting to unexpected circumstances. This was humanity's opportunity. Across the galaxy, humanity's strength was beginning to show. Other species, long oppressed by the Zoreth, watched in awe as humans began to fight back. Some of these alien races, including the Draxians, a warrior species known for their loyalty and honor, saw the tide turning and chose to stand with humanity. The Draxians offered the humans access to their advanced defensive technology and combat strategies. Their ships were equipped with powerful energy weapons that could pierce the toughest Zoreth armor. The Draxians had suffered at the hands of the Zoreth for centuries, and now they had a chance for retribution. In exchange, the humans shared their groundbreaking tactical innovations, showing the Draxians how to adapt their combat techniques to become even more efficient in battle. This alliance between humanity and the Draxians sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The Zoreth, who had once held the galaxy in an iron grip, began to realize they might be facing more than they could handle. For the first time, their impenetrable empire was showing signs of weakness. General Collins knew the time was right. Humanity was no longer just defending themselves. They were building a coalition that could challenge the Zoreth's dominance. And as the first human-led forces, now backed by the Draxians, set out on daring missions against Zoreth-controlled planets, humanity's name spread across the stars. No longer seen as a fledgling species, the humans were now a symbol of resistance, a symbol of hope. In the galactic capital, the Zoreth commanders gathered, furious at the audacity of these upstarts. They couldn't fathom that these insignificant humans were daring to challenge their supremacy. But one thing was clear now: humanity was a threat, and they would not go down quietly. As the weeks passed, humanity's resolve only grew stronger. The first successful strikes against Zoreth-controlled planets were nothing short of miraculous. Using advanced Draxian technology and a series of surprise tactics, human forces began to cripple the Zoreth's supply lines and key military infrastructure. Their successes were a shock to both their allies and their enemies. The Zoreth, who had once been invincible, were now being forced to reconsider their position. The most significant of these operations was the assault on Korath Station, a heavily fortified Zoreth base that served as a key staging point for their military operations in the region. The station was located in the heart of a Zoreth-controlled system, surrounded by defensive fleets and shielded by a dense asteroid field. On paper, the attack was doomed to fail. The human forces were vastly outnumbered, their fleet smaller, and their technology still in development. But the humans had something the Zoreth didn't: creativity and determination. General Sarah Collins had meticulously planned the mission, drawing on both human ingenuity and the Draxians' combat experience. They wouldn't engage in direct combat. Instead, they would use stealth and misdirection to outsmart the Zoreth. A handful of human ships, equipped with experimental stealth technology, would infiltrate the system under the cover of the asteroid field. Meanwhile, a decoy fleet, led by a Draxian warship, would draw attention away from the real assault. The mission was dangerous, But as the human fleet neared the station, a strange calm descended over the commanders. It wasn't just strategy they relied on. It was a deep, unshakable belief in their cause. Humanity had been tested by tragedy, but they would not be cowed. This was more than a military campaign. It was a fight for survival, for justice, and for the future. The decoy fleet moved in first, drawing the Zorath forces into a trap. The Zorath took the bait, sending most of their fleet to engage in what they believed would be a quick and easy victory. As the Zorath ships chased the decoys, the human stealth fleet, hidden among the asteroid debris, slipped past undetected. At the heart of the station, the human commandos launched their assault, planting explosives and sabotaging critical systems. Zorath soldiers, caught by surprise, scrambled to defend themselves, but they were outmatched by the speed and precision of the human soldiers. The operation was swift and brutal, with the station falling in a matter of hours. When the Zorath received word of the destruction, their rage was palpable. A key military asset had been destroyed, and they had been humiliated by a species they once considered insignificant. But as their forces scrambled to retaliate, the damage was done. The humans had proven something the galaxy had never believed possible. They could strike at the heart of the Zorath's empire and succeed. The victory was a turning point, not just for humanity, but for the entire galaxy. The Zorath were no longer untouchable. They were vulnerable. And as the news of the attack spread, more species began to take notice of humanity's growing strength. The Korethian traders, once neutral in the conflict, now openly sided with the human alliance. The Veloxi, a peaceful but technologically advanced race, offered their support, providing invaluable resources to the war effort. Humanity's reputation as a resilient, unyielding force was solidified, and as more species rallied to their cause, the Zorath found themselves on the defensive for the first time. The fight was far from over, but the tide was turning. The humans had discovered something the Zorath could never understand: the unyielding will of a people who fight for something greater than themselves. General Collins stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the stars streak by as their fleet moved to the next target. She knew there was still much to do, and the war would not be won easily. But she also knew that humanity's strength was no longer a question. They would win, not because they were the strongest, but because they refused to back down. The victories on Novus Prime and Korath Station had ignited a fire in humanity's heart. They were no longer just retaliating. They were winning. And with each victory, the Zorath began to feel the pressure. They had once believed that they could crush humanity with ease, that their vast empire would quash any resistance in an instant. But now, their entire military apparatus was on the defensive. The Zorath High Command, hidden within the depths of their flagship command station, gathered in a tense meeting. General Tsarkoth, the Zorath Supreme Commander, was furious. His once unstoppable fleet had been dealt blow after blow by the humans and their newfound allies. The humiliation of Korath Station still burned in his mind. To make matters worse, their once pristine war tactics were no longer working. The humans had adapted too quickly, outmaneuvering their forces with precision and skill. The Zorath had underestimated the human spirit, and now they were paying for it. The humans think they can keep winning, Sarkoth growled, his voice heavy with anger. They've tasted victory, and they will grow bolder. If we don't act now, they will consume everything in their path. A series of harsh murmurs filled the room. Zorath commanders and generals exchanged nervous glances. Many of them had watched as their fleets crumbled under humanity's ingenuity, their once formidable forces now on the brink of collapse. The Zorath were used to dominating their enemies, but humans were something else entirely. They fought differently, smarter, faster, and with a tenacity that the Zorath could not ignore. Desperation settled in the air as General Tsarkoth's eyes narrowed. We will show them that they are nothing more than a fleeting nuisance. Deploy the Necron dreadnoughts. Let us remind them who rules the galaxy. The Necron dreadnoughts were the Zorath's ultimate weapon. a fleet of massive, heavily armed warships designed to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. These titans of destruction were nearly invincible, outfitted with advanced technology that could tear through entire fleets in a matter of hours. If the humans could not match them in numbers or strength, then the Zorath would crush them with sheer firepower. But as the Zorath readied their dreadnoughts, General Sarah Collins, aboard the human flagship Avenger, was already aware of the impending threat. The dreadnoughts were formidable, but humanity had never been a species to back down from a fight. If anything, the Zorath's threats only fueled their resolve. Human intelligence operatives had intercepted the Zorath's plans, and the human military quickly began to prepare. A fleet of newly enhanced stealth destroyers, equipped with experimental cloaking technology and cutting-edge energy weapons, was being assembled. These ships, faster than anything the humans had ever fielded, would be humanity's key to survival against the dreadnoughts. The battle would take place in the Tyrax Nebula, a region of space known for its dense clouds of gas and debris, perfect for hiding fleets from enemy scanners. It was here that the humans would make their stand. Collins knew the stakes were higher than ever. This would be the defining moment in the war. If they failed, humanity might be doomed. But if they succeeded, the Zorath would finally know what it meant to face an adversary who would never stop fighting. Human forces, now bolstered by Draxian warships and their newfound allies, moved quickly into position. Collins stood on the bridge, her hand steady as she issued the orders. Every officer knew the risks, but there was no turning back. The battle ahead would be the most dangerous yet, and it was one the humans had to win. As the Zorath dreadnoughts emerged from the nebula, their colossal forms casting ominous shadows across the stars, General Collins's voice echoed through the command center. "This is it. We fight, or we die. There's no other choice." The humans, knowing full well that the war's future hinged on this battle, braced themselves for the coming storm. The Zorath might have believed they were untouchable, but humanity had already shown that they could strike from the shadows, and this time, they would make the Zorath regret ever underestimating them. The Tyrax Nebula was a place of chaos and beauty, a swirling mass of gas and cosmic dust that made navigation treacherous. Yet it offered the perfect cover for humanity's boldest plan. As the Zorath Nikran dreadnoughts emerged from the nebula's edge, their massive forms casting ominous shadows against the stars, General Sarah Collins stood at the helm of the Avenger, her heart steady and her mind focused. The fate of humanity rested on this single moment. The human fleet, now bolstered by Draxian and Veloxi forces, was positioned in an intricate web across the nebula, hidden from the Zorath's scanning technology. This battle was not just about firepower. It was about precision, guile, and the strength of will to see it through. If the humans could hold their ground against the dreadnoughts, they could push the Zorath into retreat, weakening their hold on the galaxy once and for all. "We have one chance at this," Collins said, her voice steady over the intercom, speaking to the commanders scattered across the fleet. "Stay focused. Engage at the first sign of weakness. We've trained for this moment. Now, we prove it." The human ships, sleek and nimble, drifted in the nebula's mist, cloaked and barely detectable. They were no match for the dreadnoughts in size or firepower, but they had something the Zorath didn't: speed and tactical flexibility. They were built for precision strikes, not sustained assaults. The first volley came unexpectedly. The Zorath scout ship, still probing the nebula's depths, collided with a human stealth destroyer that had been waiting in ambush. The scout ship's warning signals blared just before it disintegrated in a flash of blue energy, but it was already too late. The humans had been waiting for this moment, and as the scout ship sent out its final distress signal, a wave of human ships broke through the clouds of gas like predators emerging from the dark. The Zorath fleet, momentarily disoriented by the sudden strike, was forced into defensive formations. It was then that the human forces revealed their true strength. Their advanced weaponry, modified for quick strikes and overwhelming damage in short bursts, began to tear into the dreadnought's flanks. The battle raged across the nebula. The humans darted in and out of the asteroid fields, using the terrain to hide their movements and avoid the full brunt of the dreadnought's fire. Each human ship, though smaller, was nimble and well-coordinated, slipping in, delivering a deadly blow, and retreating before the Zorath could retaliate. It was a dance of death, one that demanded perfect coordination and nerves of steel. General Collins watched the battle unfold on the holographic display, her every instinct tuned to the chaos. "Now," she ordered, "focus fire on their engines. Take them down one by one." The Avenger led a group of Draxian warships in a daring maneuver, firing concentrated beams at the dreadnought's vulnerable propulsion systems. One by one, the massive warships began to slow, their once thundering engines flickering as human firepower took hold. But it wasn't enough. The Zorath's reinforcements, led by a new wave of dreadnoughts, arrived just as the human forces began to press their advantage. Suddenly, the battle turned in favor of the Zorath. The dreadnoughts were falling, but the Zorath still had the numbers and the sheer firepower to overwhelm humanity's forces. A dread silence fell over the human fleet as a colossal Zorath flagship, the Ragnarok, came into view, its weapons primed and ready. It was then that Collins realized the truth. The Zorath had anticipated their move. The Ragnarok's main guns powered up, and with terrifying force, the flagship unleashed a massive salvo of energy blasts toward the human fleet. The blasts were devastating, decimating the outer ranks of the human forces. Ships were obliterated in seconds, their wreckage scattering through the nebula. But the humans had one final card to play. As the Ragnarok began its final advance, a small fleet of human fighters, concealed in the nebula's dense gas clouds, emerged from the shadows and launched a desperate assault on the Ragnarok's exposed flank. In the final moments, as explosions lit up the dark expanse, General Collins gave one last order. "For Novus Prime. For all of us. Push forward." The human fleet, battered but unbroken, fought back with all they had. They would not let the Zorath extinguish the light of their future. The Tyrax Nebula was no longer a place of beauty. It had become a battleground, filled with the echoes of destruction. The once quiet clouds of gas and dust now glowed with the fire of war. The human fleet, battered and bruised, fought for every inch of space, but the Zorath's overwhelming numbers threatened to crush them. Despite this, the resolve of humanity did not waver. General Sarah Collins stood at the heart of the chaos, her every instinct screaming at her to hold the line, to ensure that the Zorath would not go unchallenged. The Ragnarok, the Zorath's flagship, had proven to be a formidable opponent. Its weapons cut through human lines like a hot knife through butter, and it was clear that if humanity didn't make a decisive strike soon, the Zorath would regain control. But the human fleet wasn't done yet. Collins had a plan. A dangerous one, but it was their only hope. "We need to disable their flagship. If we can take down the Ragnarok, we can break their command and sow chaos in their ranks," Collins said, her voice cold and resolute. She turned to her tactical officer, Commander Julian Watts, who was watching the status of the fleet on a holographic display. "General, if we go after the Ragnarok directly, we risk losing the whole fleet," Watts replied. "We don't have the numbers to win a prolonged engagement. Our ships are already on the brink." "I know," Collins responded, "but this is our chance. If we can get close enough to deliver a critical strike, we'll cripple their command. The rest of their forces will falter. It's all or nothing." The tension in the room was palpable. The odds were stacked against them, but humanity had fought through impossible odds before. With a single, unified command, the fleet responded. Every ship in the human fleet began to change formation, aligning toward the Ragnarok's exposed side. This would be their last push. The Draxian warships led the charge, their massive energy shields flaring to absorb the first wave of incoming fire from the Ragnarok's guns. They provided a barrier for the human destroyers, which darted through the firestorm, weaving between blasts with terrifying speed. The Zorath flagship retaliated, but the human forces were already on their way. They'd moved as one, a single, determined force. As the human ships closed in on the Ragnarok, the Zorath flagship's guns rained down death from above. Explosions rocked the human fleet as they pushed forward, the weight of the battle pressing heavily on every officer and soldier aboard. But amidst the chaos, one ship, the Avenger, led by General Collins, cut through the madness, its stealth cloaking systems just enough to allow it to slip into striking distance. Collins watched the Ragnarok grow ever closer on the holographic display. Their moment was now. "Prepare the boarding teams," Collins ordered, her voice calm but firm. "We're going in." The Avenger broke through the Ragnarok's defenses like a blade cutting through flesh. Its hull groaned as the shields flared, but the ship held. They were almost there. Suddenly, an alarm blared across the ship. "General, the Ragnarok is preparing a full-on energy barrage. It's targeting the Avenger," Watts shouted from the tactical station. There was no time to hesitate. With a single motion, Collins gave the order. "Activate the phase disruptor." The Avenger shuddered violently as the phase disruptor powered up. A beam of concentrated energy shot from the ship's core, striking the Ragnarok's exposed weapons array. The shot pierced through the Zorath's defenses and ripped into the flagship's hull. For a moment, the universe held its breath. Then, the Ragnarok's massive guns went silent. The Zorath flagship lurched, its systems flickering as the Avenger's strike tore into its heart. Sparks flew, alarms screamed, and the once dominant Zorath flagship began to lose its grip on the battlefield. "Target their reactors," Collins barked. "All units, open fire." The human fleet, emboldened by the strike, erupted in unison. Draxian ships unleashed their devastating energy cannons, striking the Ragnarok's weakened shields. Human destroyers followed, unleashing volleys of precise torpedoes aimed at the flagship's most vulnerable points. It wasn't long before the Zorath flagship was little more than a drifting hulk, its weapons disabled, its shields failing. The humans had broken through. But there was no time for celebration. As the Ragnarok faltered, a message from the Zorath High Command blared across the communications channels. "Retreat. This war is not over. We will return." Humanity had dealt a devastating blow to the Zorath, but the war was far from won. For the first time in the conflict, the Zorath were retreating, but it was clear that this victory was just one chapter in a much longer struggle. Collins watched the Zorath ships retreat, knowing that the cost of this battle had been heavy. The war was far from over, but humanity had proven one undeniable truth to the galaxy: they would not be defeated. The Ragnarok was destroyed, its once mighty hull drifting through the void, the remains of the Zorath flagship no longer a threat. The Zorath High Command, now reeling from the loss, was forced to retreat, and humanity's forces held the battlefield. For a brief moment, there was silence. The battle had been hard-fought, but the victory was theirs. But as the dust settled in the Tyrax Nebula, it became evident that the cost of this victory had been high. Human ships limped from the field, their hulls scorched and pockmarked from the Zorath's relentless assault. The Avenger, once pristine and powerful, now bore the scars of its final push. Its systems were damaged, its weapons array inoperable, but it had done its job. It had struck the fatal blow to the Zorath's command structure. General Sarah Collins stood on the bridge of the Avenger, staring out into the void. The triumphant cheers of her crew echoed around her, but inside, she felt nothing but the weight of their losses. They had won, yes, but at what cost? The casualties on both sides had been immense, and many of her allies were in pieces. "General," Commander Julian Watts called, his voice tense. "The fleet is requesting an immediate retreat. We're in no condition to continue fighting if the Zorath regroup." Collins turned slowly to face him. He was right. They had fought bravely, but their resources were running thin. And the Zorath, despite their retreat, would only be gathering strength for the next confrontation. "No," Collins said firmly. "We stay in position. The Zorath need time to regroup. We cannot let them recover. Prepare a damage report on the fleet and start coordinating with the Draxians for emergency repairs." The words felt heavy in her mouth. A retreat was always an option, but for the first time, it felt like surrender. Humanity had only just begun to gain the upper hand in this war, and Collins wasn't about to give that up without a fight. In the hours that followed, the Avenger limped back to the nearest human-controlled space station, Fortitude Base, just outside the edge of the Tyrax Nebula. The rest of the fleet followed, their ships battered but alive. As they docked, a somber mood descended over the station. No victory felt sweet when you lost so much in the process. The Draxians, who had fought alongside the humans in this pivotal battle, moved quickly to offer medical aid and technological support. Their warships were better suited for repairs, and their engineers immediately set to work on patching up the human ships. Inside the command center of Fortitude Base, General Collins met with her senior staff. They were a grim group, their faces tired from the battle, their bodies strained from days of constant combat. Collins, though just as exhausted, stood tall. She needed to remain strong for them, for the people they had lost. "The Zorath have learned to fear us," she began, her voice calm but resolute. "But this victory is only one step. They will come again, and they will come with everything they have. We need to prepare for that." A murmur of agreement spread among the commanders, but Collins could see the hesitation in their eyes. They had won, yes, but it didn't feel like a true triumph. They had thrown everything into this battle, and the sacrifices were too heavy to ignore. Commander Watts spoke up. "General, we have to consider the toll this has taken on our forces. We need reinforcements. If the Zorath regroup, we won't be able to stand against them for long." Collins nodded. She knew the stakes. Their forces were stretched thin, and there was no guarantee of a quick resolution. But this was their moment. They couldn't afford to lose the momentum. "We'll send out a call for help," she said firmly. "And we'll make sure the Zorath know that humanity's strength cannot be crushed. We may be outnumbered, but we've proven we can fight, and we will continue to fight until the war is won." The room fell silent, but as they all turned to face her, a new resolve settled in their hearts. The road ahead was fraught with peril, but one thing was certain: humanity would not bow to anyone. As the Avenger prepared for repairs, and the fleet readied itself for the next phase of the war, the galaxy learned a simple truth. Humanity had proven itself, not just as a species capable of survival, but as a force that would never surrender. The weeks that followed the Tyrax Nebula battle were a blur of repairs, strategizing, and desperate diplomacy. The Zorath, although wounded, had not been broken. They retreated into the deepest corners of their empire, regrouping, rebuilding their strength. But humanity had proven something that day. They were not invincible. That was the spark of hope that burned brightly in every human heart, from the command center of Fortitude Base to the farthest colonies on the edge of the galaxy. General Sarah Collins sat in her private quarters, staring at the stars outside her window. She had not slept for days, too consumed by the weight of the next step. The Zorath had learned to fear them. But the question was, would that be enough to win this war? The Avenger had been repaired, but its hull was still scared, its systems weakened. It wasn't the only ship in need of repairs. The entire fleet was on its last legs, their resources stretched to the limit. The Draxians had offered aid, but their own forces had taken considerable losses in the battle, and their ships were not invulnerable. Every officer in the room knew that they were running out of time before the Zorath gathered their forces and launched a counteroffensive. The next battle could be the last for them all. "We can't keep going like this," Commander Julian Watts said as he entered the room, his voice carrying the exhaustion of too many sleepless nights. "The fleet is at breaking point. Our forces need reinforcements, and we need them now. If the Zorath strike again with full force, we won't last." Collins nodded, knowing he was right. They had stretched every resource, called in every favor, and yet it still didn't feel like enough. The United Earth Alliance had sent out distress signals across the galaxy, but the response had been lackluster at best. Allies were few and far between, and many other races had retreated into isolation, unwilling to take part in the war. "We have one option left," Collins said, standing up. Her decision was final, and she knew it would come with its own risks. "We'll launch a full assault on the Zorath homeworld, Zathora. If we can strike directly at the heart of their empire, it could break their will to continue the war." Watt stared at her, disbelief creeping into his features. "Zathora, their homeworld. General, that's a suicide mission. Even with our best forces, we won't have the numbers to overwhelm them." "I'm aware of the risks," Collins replied, her voice firm. "But if we don't take the fight to their doorstep now, they will rebuild, and it will be even harder to defeat them later. This is our best chance to end the war." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. They all knew it was the only way. A direct strike on the Zorath homeworld would cripple their command structure, cut off their resources, and possibly break the morale of the entire Zorath Empire. But it was a gamble, one that could cost them everything. "The Zorath are brutal, but they are not invincible," Collins continued. "We've shown that. Now we show them that the galaxy has a new power, one that will fight until the very end." Commander Watts gave her a long, hard look. He knew there was no turning back once the order was given. He nodded, his voice somber but resolute. "We'll do it, General. We're with you." The following hours were filled with frenetic preparation. Every human ship in the fleet was readied for a journey into the heart of the Zorath Empire. The Avenger was the flagship, its crew still battered but determined to carry out the mission. As the fleet gathered at the edge of the Zorath system, the enormity of what they were about to do settled over them like a heavy fog. The final assault was not just about destroying the Zorath, it was about sending a message. Humanity would no longer be a conquered species, a victim of galactic warfare. They were going to show the universe that they were a force to be reckoned with. Collins looked out at the fleet, her gaze steady. The battle ahead would be the most dangerous humanity had ever faced. There was no guarantee they would return, but one thing was clear: they would fight to the end. "Prepare for launch," Collins ordered, "for the future of humanity." With those final words, the human fleet moved forward, their destination set: Zathora, the heart of the Zorath Empire. They were about to make their final stand.